Hello and welcome to the Permaculture Vine podcast. I'm not sure what episode it is, forgot to check. But today we're here to talk about agrivoltaics for our monthly live stream. And we have Permaculture Canada here, myself, and Azure as well. I'm your host, Cormac Harkin. Graham, you just want to introduce yourself quickly there?
You betcha. Graham Towerton. I am the Chief Operations Officer for Permaculture Canada. I'm based in Adrian, Michigan, and I also operate my business, Permaculture Adventures of Michigan, for all the local landscaping work based on designs done by Permaculture Canada.
Lindsay?
And Armagarden. Oh, yeah, we've got a little bit of cutting in the screen going on, so hopefully we'll have a good connection today. I'm down here in the mountains in the Slocan Valley in BC, and I brought our guest today is Azure.
Howdy, my name's Azure, world traveler, and have a lot of experience with art in all shapes and forms. Currently working on how to live inside of a sustainable art system.
Class. Well, welcome, sir. So what have you been up to? Just a quick catch up, Graham. You've been planting trees. How are you getting on with that?
Yeah, planting trees. 1,122 6 feet tall Black Hills spruce, to be specific, and that's a project that's around the buffer zones of the solar farm that adjoins my property. So basically what happened was the previous contractor did not a very good job of the way that they planted the trees, and more than half of them died within the first year after planting. So I was requested to replace them. So starting in early September, we were awarded the contract for that. Prior to the team all getting here around the 22nd, 23rd of September, I spent a couple of weeks pulling out a lot of the dead trees with my pickup truck and a tow strap to pull them out of the ground. And then Azure was here along with
pulling out a lot of the dead trees with
my daughter Lily and several other participants in the project. My farm manager Julia, her partner Sean, and then friends and friends of friends and friends of friends of friends. We ended up with probably 9 or 10 team members in total throughout the 6 weeks of the project, but we concluded it last week. Wednesday of last week specifically, we got all the mulch finished on the trees. So it was a process of pulling out the dead trees, redigging the holes, putting the new trees in the holes, taking the cages and the burlap off the bottom of the trees, putting them in the holes, tamping down the dirt, straightening up the trees, taking twine off trees, putting tags on trees, taking other tags off trees, and then mulching and watering. So it's been a very, very long project. In total, it was a $325,000 contract, and it's been a very, very good project from the perspective of learning and working out how to manage a very, very large tree planting project. So that's not something I've done before. I think my biggest effort previously was to plant 40 or 50 trees in one location. So planting 1,100 plus trees has been a huge big project undertaking. A lot of heavy equipment work. My thanks to Azure for being the wizard on the machinery while he was here, and my daughter Lily, who also learned how to use the equipment. Quite proud of her because she took it on without any prior experience and ended up becoming quite good at operating both a backhoe and a skid steer loader. So it's been fun, and I think the funnest part of all of it has been the fact that I had a payroll budget for about $50,000 and spent just about every part of that and was able to put all that money in the pockets of my team members. So it's been a lot of fun for that reason as well.
Great stuff. What about you? You guys use traveling at the moment?
We are, yeah. We're just in BC. We're tying up a few loose ends before we take off to Central America for 4 months. We've got the Gooneyland Intentional Community Project that we're going to be checking in on. I've been working on business planning development with them. So we're going to go down to the land and get a few more drone shots of the properties that they have for their lease agreements that we're creating, and take a look at the properties for our own self-interest as well. I'll let Azura talk more on what he's up to pretty quick, but that's part of what we're up to on this trip. Just visiting some friends and wrapping up loose ends. We're out here getting an RV looked at that we're going to be probably putting on land to live in while we build something. So maybe I'll hand that over to Azura at this time just to let you know what he's up to in the permaculture world and how he had experience working with Graham on the solar project that they just finished.
Yeah, I guess I'll start with right now what we're up to. I have a school bus in Calgary. That thing I'm looking at getting converted over to veggie oil so that I can run it for carbon neutral, practically free scenario. I've got the inside completely redone as a living space. In this town in Slocan that we're looking at right now, I've lived in that for about a year. The past 3 years, I've been working with silviculture, doing a lot of brush cutting and tree planting out in most of BC and Alberta. So that RV was kind of my base camp for where I'd start my day and where I'd end my day. And we're going to be using both the RV and the school bus on the next site that we're looking at building. And that's going to be our base camp to establish systems between sustainable living and permaculture gardening. I feel.
And
Yeah,
he's undergoing some training.
You guys are breaking up a
Electrician.
lot there.
He's gonna
We're only getting half of it.
Are we?
Yeah, we're only
Okay,
getting half of it.
Were you getting better?
Are you?
Were you getting better
Yeah.
inside?
I think I was getting better reception
Okay.
inside. We'll go inside.
Don't worry, I can tell that dog to be quiet.
That was but unfortunately there, guys, they'll be back in a minute. Yeah, Graham, something to add to the repertoire of permaculture adventures now as well. The tree planting and Permaculture Canada, I'm sure.
Yeah, so it was a big project, and I guess the stuff that comes out of it is that I've got now a great working relationship with the project manager for the solar farm, and he's now invited us to bid on mowing all the lawns for the 2 solar fields as well, and 2 others totaling 440 acres for 4 times a year.
Wow.
So I've got that to work on over the winters to work out how to do the lawn mowing for 3 solar farms. But the other part is during the very first week of the project, the local manager came up and introduced himself and said that they have the same problems with several other fields where the trees need replaced. And so they've got 7 solar farms here in Michigan so far. They got 2 more in construction fairly close by. So I feel like I've put a good step forward, with this project, and demonstrating good performance, with the team that we can now handle other projects and bid on them and have a chance of winning them. So, and then quite coincidentally, while we were working on this project, just right through the very last week, there was a gentleman came and visited the solar farm, and he's a solar farm advocate and helps them to manage their vegetation, and asked me if I wanted to be introduced to all the other companies that have got solar farms in the area as well. So I feel like we've got a reputation that we've established with this project because it's very visible right here next to the town. I went to a township board of directors meeting to talk about the project, and everybody was super excited with what had happened because of how bad the trees had been, with the ones that had died. So being so visible with probably, 1,000, 1,500 cars driving past on the highway in front of me every day, a lot of people get to see the work as it was being done, and that the news has spread. So I feel like we're in good shape now for being able to bid on other projects just because of the good work that was done by the team on this one.
Class, nice one. Sorry guys, he's caught out there. Is there, do you want to continue where he left off there? We just mentioned that these were moving the 2 campers onto a piece of land.
Yeah, so the RV, I've lived in that for the past few years. I got a wood stove in there, and I've been redoing the interior. We're going to be taking it out to a new site once we've established where and what we're doing there. And once the weather's actually easy to work with, because we're having snow in the next couple days, and then it's going to be hard to do much anything in this area until about April.
But yeah, so he's got a school bus as well. We're going to have a school bus and RV to live in while we're potentially building an earthship out in Golden, BC. He's doing the Biotecture earthship training over the winter. So I think level 2 for that education is to actually have a live project. So it'll give us an opportunity to put the knowledge to use and potentially run a course while we do it. So building a first structure out in Golden.
And 2 days ago, we were on a friend's property. Alec, they've set up their own micro hydro system. Everything electrically is self-sustainable there for pennies, surprisingly. Mm-hmm. And they also have an earthship out there that's unfinished. So I came in and I assessed where it was, and I'm going to look with the person who was building it, my friend Dustin, and see how feasible it is to continue the project and see where that's going to go. So I already have a few earthship projects lined up. It'd be nice just to get my house built first.
Well, that's definitely a future podcast then on earthships.
Yeah.
For a live, that would be great. Great stuff. Graham, do you want to kick off now on agrivoltaics?
Yeah, love to. So first let's give a definition of what agrivoltaics is. So with you got a solar farm, that's the voltaic part generating electricity, and so agri is just incorporating agriculture within the solar farm itself, and then it's a case of what kind of agriculture can you do within a solar farm, and it really, in my opinion, depends on the design of the solar farm. So there've been some folks that have been fairly innovative in the way that they structure the panel arrays. Cormac, you, Lindsay, and I have all looked at the ones, I think, once before that were built in the Netherlands that were mounted, 30, 40 feet up in the air, which enabled heavy equipment like tractors and stuff to get in underneath and manage a farm in much the same way as you would ordinarily without the solar panels being there. And then there's newer technology for solar panels, which are more translucent and actually allows light to pass through so that vegetation underneath can benefit from it. If I just use the example of the solar farm that's right next to me, the panels are all mounted on north-south oriented rotating bars, and they rotate from east to west each day. Those bars are mounted about 5.5, 6 feet up off the ground. And so it doesn't really allow a lot of space underneath the panels for much of anything to grow. And then the other option is to put livestock into a solar farm and manage the vegetation that way. So again, it all depends on the design of the arrays and how high up off the ground they are as to what you can do underneath. But here in Michigan, most of them are fairly low, not very high up off the ground, and so that limits your ability to use livestock, because if you wanted to use goats, they'll try to climb up on the panels and they can do damage in that fashion. As it turns out, Michigan State University has literally written the book on agrivoltaics when it comes to grazing sheep on pasture within solar farms. And so that's a fairly good option because sheep don't tend to climb, at least just the woolly barbars, as we call them in Australia. They just tend to want to go around and chew the grass down all the way to the ground. And I'm not a big fan of grazing sheep, frankly, on pasture here in Michigan because the soil is pretty easily damaged and sheep can be pretty good at damaging soil very, very quickly. So with the field that's next to us and, with the new relationship developed with that solar company, I want to look at what kinds of vegetation we can put under within the solar farm. But what we'll do first is we'll actually start with the verges or the buffer areas around the outside. So the local ordinance for the solar farm requires that they maintain a setback of 150 feet to the fence. And so right along the main road that I mentioned that passes the solar farm, there's a 1/4 mile long strip, 150 foot wide, that's got nothing on it but pasture. And that's all outside of the fence of the solar farm. So and that continues around my place and then around the east side of the field. So there's a total of about probably 25 acres of buffer areas that don't have any panels on it. It's outside the field fence. And so this particular solar farm has started to give me access to that and has invited me to come up with ideas for what we can do for use of those buffers. And so we could do regenerative pasture management and graze livestock on that of any kind if we want to, for putting up the fences. Other ideas include putting in tree farms, because we know that they need a lot of trees, and so we could start to grow those and sell them back to the solar company once they reach maturity. All kinds of options for community gardens. They've already told me that they're quite willing to entertain that and having other people come onto the property and use it for community gardening space. And then there's, all of the things that I could do just with, other crops that I could grow if I have more space. So I've got raspberries and asparagus that I've planted on my 7 acres, and there are crops like that I could put out as well and gain further revenues if I wanted to. So again, definition of agrivoltaics is the incorporation of agriculture into a solar farm. I guess you could say into a wind turbine farm as well, because that's voltage as well. And then it's really a case of the design of the farm, which determines what options you've got available for the agricultural aspects.
Yeah, so on this past project, that was kind of highlighted, I think, in terms of why the project came our way and what needed to be done, right? So there was a failed implementation of a very poor windbreak, right? When you think about it, when we look at windbreaks in permaculture, we're looking at least 5 different species so that we have this density so that the wind is hitting it a certain way. And of course, this isn't commonly thought about in the shelter belts that we see today, right? It's more of that monoculture crop sort of scenario where they're like, let's pick this one tree, and then the implementation wasn't proper either. The trees weren't cared for. So then you were losing trees because they were planted in their binds and then they weren't accurately watered. But if you think about, the resiliency of what they've done by choosing one species right off the bat, you're going for a fail. Say there's just that one species of tree gets an airborne disease, you're going to annihilate your entire farm. So when I saw the project that was presented, okay, we need to replace these trees. It's like, well, it's an educational opportunity as well to say, hey, look, okay, sure, yeah, we'll replace these trees for you, but let's actually talk about what we're working with here and what the purpose of what this is that they're already spending so much money to implement, right? How can you make this better? So not only for the biodiversity of species, by bringing in different species of trees, bushes, different shrub heights and layers, that's going to create a polyculture in your flora system, but it's also going to create more biodiversity in the birds that you're bringing in and, the insects that are going to be there. So there's potential there, not only ecologically, but a financial gain for the solar farm owner as well. So that's where I consider to start thinking, okay, well, if we are going to be planting 5 species of trees, why not create a tree farm type model that you can then get yields from? So yes, you can keep that buffer there, but then you can also propagate from those trees to have excess of trees. Whether or not that's something that this solar farm wants to manage on their own is, up for discussion, but to think about, well, other ways of giving back from this tree farm. Maybe they don't need the money of the tree farm, but maybe somebody does. So it's an opportunity for you to create a tree farm, plan and design around as an eco buffer that can also feed the community, right? Because then maybe you're going to get plant sales out of this buffer zone that you can propagate from and share with the community as well. So I think there's a huge potential in these projects to be, working on a large scale to make a lot of change on a lot of different levels, right? For the community at large, for the species at hand. As we know, trees make rain, right? So that's going to also increase the, precipitation of the environment and so on. So yeah, I just see a lot of really good potential with these. Of course, you talked about the grazing aspect, about animal integration. That's one thing, but there's also, different shapes of solar farms. I know we're looking at projects in Zambia right now that have circular tubes, right? They're tubes and they don't start till they're 6 feet off the ground and they're turning and they're following the sun, right? So it's really interesting to see how these different solar farm models present different opportunities based on what they look like and how the solar farm itself is constructed. Any thoughts on your experience working around the solar farm? Working with the trees, what you saw?
Well, the space from the highway to the buffer of the fence, like there's only the bare minimum that's happening right now as far as that buffer zone goes. There's just a lot of space there to play with. That's not necessarily getting in the way of any of the solar farm operation. A lot
Absolutely.
of what a lot of what you were saying about that food, like if ponderosa pine mixed with that Korean pine, that would start creating a delicious nut scenario 25 years down the road.
Pine nuts for pesto, my favorite.
Right? Yeah, as far as that local area goes, is there much for community gardening? Because there is a big old strip right there, and it's so close to town.
Yeah, and there's not anything else. We didn't really get a chance to spend a lot of time driving, around the outsides of the town. There's another permaculture farm that's actually at the Dominican Sisters, right next to Siena Heights University, and it's about 7 or 8 acres, I believe. But they have largely just used it for production of food for the Dominican Sisters and to provide them for something to do in their retirement after being nuns in service. And so there's not a lot of public access to it, and it really was a bit of a chore for me just to get in and go even see it. So in terms of actual community gardens where people can go in, see it, touch it, taste it, feel it, smell it, and play with it and do their own thing, we don't have anything like that here in Adrian. And certainly I don't think there's much of anything except maybe up in Ann Arbor, and there's certainly some in Detroit, which is over an hour and a half away. So I'd really like to see that model developed. And given that the solar farm here at least is quite amenable to the idea, they just said they just don't want anybody inside the fence. And so they just want to manage their liability for not having people get hurt. So then I've got to work out, the infrastructure that would need to be put in place for doing community gardens, and then work out the way to raise all the capital for that as well. Water being the first thing, because there's no water on that property. As you can recall, we had to bring in a frac tank for the water. So then it's really a case of, working out the water, the access, the structures, the things that we all do in permaculture as the mainframe design. And that buffer strip that's along that highway, again, the visibility of that, if we could turn it into community gardens, I think it's just going to be a magnet for people wanting to come and do that kind of work on this property. And then it's very accessible to the market. As you realize, it's like, 5-10 minutes drive to downtown Adrian. And then, there's all kinds of places that we could put the food into restaurants if we wanted to, or, it's not far to get to Detroit or Ann Arbor if we wanted to look for a bigger market. So I think it's a great location, this one. And, as you said, there's not much on there right now. So the only stuff that's there, and I just wanted to mention, I guess, more about the solar farm ordinance that drives this type of behavior of doing it wrong in the first place. The township that created the ordinance basically told the solar farm that they have to manage the vegetation and keep it under 12 inches in height all year round. And so the solar farm, in my opinion, when they took over the property from the farmer who'd been managing it under a traditional corn, soybean, and wheat rotation for who knows how many decades, the first thing they came in and did was to cover crop it. And they cover cropped it with a whole heap of perennial grasses and clovers. And I thought that was really quite innovative, I guess, compared to what I've seen done elsewhere. And within the first year, that had taken over, and we had some of the purple clovers getting 2 feet deep and nearly 3 feet deep with their growth. That got them in trouble with the city and the township because the vegetation was too deep according to the ordinance. So the first part of my work is going to be to go visit with the township. And I mentioned that board of directors meeting that I went to. I floated the idea across them of, changing the ordinance so that we don't have this, 12 inches in height maximum as a vegetation constraint, because then we can start to put in other things that are going to provide us with benefits. let the clovers grow deep. The comment that I made to the board of directors and the public that was there was that when they did the final mowing that was required, and that was happening right as we're doing the planting, they came and did the mowing. The monarch butterflies were all over that property all through September, and not just monarchs, but swallowtails and all kinds of other different insects, butterflies. And as soon as the mowing took place, they're all gone because the food went with the mowing. And so when I mentioned that at the township meeting, there were a few gasps of awe from the people who really care about things like that. And so they very quickly understood that their ordinance was causing the problem, and so we'll get that changed. I've got no doubt we can get that done. It's a simple thing to change. You've got a few folks on the board that were just concerned about our good friends, the Canadian thistles that are all over this part of the world. They want to keep that managed because it's an invasive weed in this part. And, there's lots of different ways to do that without just necessarily mowing it down and spraying it with harmful pesticides. So we'll take that approach first, and then once we've got that managed with the township to get the ordinance changed and to allow the different activities and uses on there, then my next job is to put together the proposal with Permaculture Canada to, here's how we're going to design it and here's how we're going to build it so that we can bring the people in and have those community gardens or the tree farm or, the other aspects of agriculture on the property.
Oh, we lost them.
Oh, yeah, just like that.
Just like that. Somebody stick 10p in the meter there.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, agree, Matt. A lot of stuff I never thought about there. A few things. The ordinances. The rules that are there to sort of protect, keep everything right, were actually causing a problem.
Yeah. Well, so the ordinance was put together, by the township. And, one of the members who was on the planning committee at the time was actually a farmer that was also selling the land to the solar farm. So that person had a vested interest in the solar farm coming to town. But I felt like the solar farm ordinance was put together in a fashion where people thought, we'll just, make them plant a buffer and we'll make them control the vegetation. And there wasn't much thought to the preparation of the ordinance itself. I think, they went and copied somebody else's, frankly, from a different county. And that's part of the problem that we have, at least specifically here in Michigan, is that we have more levels of government in this state than perhaps any other state in the United States. So we have the township government, we have the city government, we have the county government, and then we have the state government, and then we have the federal government. And so it's 5 different government organizations that may or may not be involved in your project from a regulatory standpoint. And so for me, it's the township where I have to start first, but the townships in Michigan are literally every few miles. And so the township that I'm in, which is Adrian Township, sits next to the city of Adrian, sits next to Raisin River Township, sits next to 3 or 4 other townships, all in the space of 10 square miles. And so if I was to do another project over in Raisin River Township, and I will be, then their ordinance is different again. And so that's the landscape that I have to navigate from a regulatory standpoint. But this solar ordinance, I took a look at it right from the time that this project was announced because I was going to be their neighbor, and they wanted me to be a happy neighbor. So they were really good about communicating to me what was going on with the project, when they were going to build it, how they were going to do it, and sharing with me the ordinance and all those kinds of things. And so as I said earlier, I was really quite happy to see them cover cropping it. I thought that was a good start. And they've been very good for me to work with as their neighbor. They've done a lot of good things for me, including, giving me the 4.6 acres of land that, I have now to go with my original 2.3 acres. So I'm really quite happy to have them as a neighbor. There's no complaints there at all. But they've been forced to do things just because of this ordinance. And, so when I sat in that board meeting, I said, hey, look, these folks would like to do something innovative, but you won't let them because of your ordinance. And so they agreed that, that's a conversation we can have to discuss making the changes to it. And then once those changes are made, then we can go ahead with, all of the rest of the stuff that we need to. But hopefully, we can get some uniformity to the ordinances as we go from place to place as well. So, I want to maybe look at some point creating a model ordinance for solar farms so that we can then propagate that out to all of the rest of the townships and city governments across the state of Michigan and also into Indiana and Ohio, so that we create some uniformity, in terms of how the administration takes place on all these different farms. Because literally within driving distance of my place, there's probably 12 solar farms, and every single one of them has a different ordinance that they have to operate under, which is just crazy.
Well, one thing I find in these kind of scenarios is just a lack of education. How many people do you think know this information you're sharing until they have to know? One thing I would kind of like to see possibly that I think the solar farm might benefit from too, since it's got so much extra space it has to manage. What if there was just a little info spot that had one of their solar panels there showing what it's doing and what it puts out for production? So with such a high traffic road, someone can pull over, kind of like a visitor center. When you come into town, there's a visitor center. The visitor center will tell you what's going on. Like that kind of just spreads the knowledge. And I think the solar farm would probably benefit from people knowing better what's going on instead of just seeing this thing that the town considers an eyesore so much that they have to hide it with trees.
I think that's a grand idea. The thing I see that would be great about that is that, that could sit right at the front entrance to the community garden, and people then can see that information and truly understand what the solar farm is doing. When the project was announced, I cannot tell you how much bad information was being pushed around on the local internet, on Facebook groups and stuff like that, to talk about the project and all of the terrible things it was going to create. And 90% of those things have not come true. One of the common myths associated with solar farms is it's going to increase the temperature. And it's like people are told, through misinformation that the panels are black and they're going to absorb light and turn it into heat, and that's going to raise the temperature. Well, for me, as a farmer, if I got an extra 5 degrees of temperature here in Michigan, I'm going to be super excited about it because it's going to stop a lot of frost and help me grow bananas here in Michigan. But the truth of the matter is I haven't seen any increase in temperature. I haven't seen any change in the snow around the field compared to the other areas that aren't part of the field. So there's just all kinds of misinformation like that. Another thing was how much glare that there was going to be. Well, there's not any glare associated with these types of panels. They're designed to actually absorb light, not reflect it, because that's how they increase the efficiency of the panels. So just a little bit of science, as to how these things work and what they do and how they benefit, as opposed to all the misinformation. I think that would be a good thing to have, and a little visitor center, and show how the panels work and show a working model and how much electricity is being produced and where it goes and what happens during peak hours and what happens during the nighttime, all that kind of stuff. Azura, when you were here, you were observing the panels, how some of them weren't rotating, and what does that mean in terms of efficiency of the field? And, so Azura pointed that out, and I said, yeah, I'll chat with the field manager. And now I got another little task on my list from him is to report back to him if I see certain parts of the field that aren't rotating properly, so he can get his guy out here and, maximize the production of the field. At some point, that's a service that I'll charge him for. If, they're not going to have their people come and inspect it, I'll do it for them. And, since I'm right here, I can and help them understand if they've got problems and maybe go fix them.
Yeah, and then some information then too on how you use plants in that buffer zone and that information pack. So Graham, you mentioned negativity there. The two ones that I heard was that basically the solar panels, particularly here in Ireland, the best place for solar panels is the best place to grow food. So it's taking away agricultural land. And then the other one was, does it poison the land? Does it make the land toxic? That's the two biggest sort of anti things I've heard about it.
Yeah, so let's first talk about the buffers. That again was part of the ordinance that they said you must plant trees that are 6 foot tall, and they need to be spaced at 10-foot intervals. There wasn't any other specification other that they needed to be evergreens. So we can't use deciduous. And that's basically for visibility more than anything else. The intent is that these buffers get planted so that when they grow and fill out, they block the view. So that's the intent, not necessarily for windbreak, but will have that effect as well. And I don't know that the wind actually does anything good or bad for the solar panels. I'm sure if it blocks the wind in a storm event or something like that, it's going to help protect the panels from being damaged, which would be a good thing for the field owner to not have to deal with. But then, if we look at, the vegetation that we could put in there as well, we can make those buffers, 150 feet wide instead, and put all kinds of other vegetation in there. I'd certainly would love to see wildflower meadows incorporated. We've got a couple, call them dry stream beds that run through the middle of the solar farm. And if we looked at an aerial map, we could show where those are, and those come down and run around the west side of my property. And I'd like to see all of those, call it riparian riverbanks or stream banks, planted out with erosion control plants and wildflower meadows, and then not mow them at all. The vegetation could be 3, 4, 5 feet deep, and it won't affect the solar panels at all if we plant those types of things in those areas, because they're far enough away from the panels. It won't affect the light at all, or the ability for the panels to work effectively. The tree farm folks, the solar farm folks have told me that their only requirement for vegetation is that whatever we plant, if it reaches a maximum height of X, that we plant it no closer than 3X away from the nearest panel. And so if we had a tree that was going to reach 20 feet in height, then we need to plant it 60 feet away from the panels so that they don't have any risk of light impacting the panels. But that's only on the east side of the field to stop any early morning sunlight from hitting the panels when they're rotated fully to the east, and on the west side of the panel for the same reason in the afternoons. On the north and south sides, they don't care because they're not absorbing light from the south in the wintertime because of the rotation of these panels. And so, I think that buffer zone, that Azura described, that runs along the highway, 150 feet deep, quarter mile long, we plant the tar out of that with everything that we can and turn it into paradise.
I'm going to play devil's advocate here because somebody's got to do it. Because I have met a lot of people, like when we were in Kansas last year, of course. When we talk about the scale and the size of these farms, some of them are immense. So when it comes to affecting weather patterns and the heat that they're accumulating, that can be very real in Tornado Alley and can be very destructive. So talking to people there about solar, that was a big concern for people in Kansas. Is like they were kilometers and kilometers long, these massive projects. And then when a tornado does rip through there, it throws these solar farms into shards all over their property, right?
Good point.
So, yeah, so I've seen that aspect of things. And I'm just throwing this down just to equalize and dualize the conversation, because of course there's two sides to every story. And, taking a look at the scale of these solar farms and their proximity to watersheds and things like that is also something that hasn't, right? So we have the opportunity to redesign. Well, where is an acceptable, if acceptable is something, where is that? What does that look like? And then the mitigation techniques will probably be dependent on those geographies as well. So just planting that in there. And then also we've had contact with people that were very strongly against solar farm activities in the past. That
we had that conversation with that friend of yours, didn't we?
Yeah. Yes. And she is very active in being the halfway point between the average farmer and the legal side of these big solar projects before they're implemented. There is usually, well, I guess it depends on where you are, a process where the community is told, this is going to happen, and they have an opportunity to create input. Sadly, the work that she was doing is kind of highlighted the fact that the language of this sort of meeting between, the big conglomerates and the actual farmer is so difficult to understand. It's not written in a way that a layman can understand. And here in Canada, some of the farmers' lands is being, they're signing off on their own land without realizing it. So there's a ton of these layers, these social structure layers that I just wanted to poke, the bear at.
Yeah, those are some good points. And, Cormac, back to your question about toxicity, is there any? People are concerned about, rainfall falling on the panels, picking up contaminants, and that washes into the, local watershed. The question is, what would those contaminants be? The field is structured out of galvanized steel posts and supports, with aluminum frame panels, and those panels are covered with a polycarbonate film, I believe, that they use now. They don't use glass anymore. In any event, there's certain elements, I guess, that could get dissolved, if we had acid rain hitting the panels. And, we did have that once here before. Our friends up in Canada used to complain about all of the acid rain created by the smokestacks in America until we fixed all of that with our US EPA. In any event, the solution to that particular problem is to test water, literally, and see what is happening. I know that there's a lot of baseline stream monitoring that takes place in this part of the world. There's, local county conservation district takes samples, and I've seen them out sampling the creek right next to me to know that they're active with that type of activity. And then I can go to them and ask them, what did they find? And then as a former water treatment engineer, I can start to guide their testing so that, they look for the right things. And for me personally, and I'll throw another sort of devil's advocate question back at you. It's like, do I put up with the toxicity from the solar farm, or do I keep the neighboring farmer that was spraying glyphosate 3 times a year and then putting all kinds of liquid manures out onto the property and spraying with other herbicides and pesticides, 2, 3, 4 times a year? I know what I prefer to have. I feel like the vegetation, can be a good solution to any toxicity risk, because we can plant the right things that can absorb any of this metallic toxicity that might be present from the different elements on the solar farm. And I know, Lindsay, you've got a good range of knowledge attached to using hemp for soil remediation. So that's the kind of thing that we could potentially do. Inside the field, it's got the right size fence that we could actually grow licensed hemp here in Michigan if we wanted to. And so that's the type of stuff that, we could do to mitigate a potential risk associated with toxicity. Or, we could turn it back into farmland and put up with all the other toxins that were being sprayed. And that kind of goes back to your other question, Cormac, about, taking up farmland. No doubt in my mind, here in Michigan, Indiana, Ohio, as I drive around, the farmland is what's disappearing. And it's disappearing under 2 things. It's disappearing under urban sprawl, and it's disappearing under solar farms. No doubt in my mind. 10 years ago, you couldn't see a solar farm anywhere here within southern Michigan at all. And now we've got literally thousands and thousands and thousands of acres of solar farms. I mean, the 3 that I'm being potentially asked to mow add up to 440 acres for 3 fields. But just south of here, there's one in Indiana. I know that it takes like 3 miles to drive around the side of it because it's so big. It's, probably 1,900 acres by itself, occupies 3 sections of land. And so that's good quality farmland that, frankly, the price of farmland is continuing to go up, making it harder and harder for the average person to access land for farming purposes. Just that quarter section of land around me, 160 acres, sold for probably $2.5 million back in the day that it transacted between the prior owners and the farmer before the solar field. I don't know what the solar field paid for it. They probably didn't care because they needed to have land, and they would have bought the neighboring farm just as quickly if they wanted to. And you've got another situation, I guess, that's occurring that's driving all of this, is that you've got a lot of aging farmers in America that are looking to try to find an effective way to cash out of the assets that they've got. When Lindsay and I attended the Acres Conference last year in Wisconsin, I think it was Joel Salatin or maybe Gabe Brown talked about the age of the average American farmer being in the high 60s, low 70s typically in age. But another thing that's a problem is in this country, we still have a death tax. And if you have a certain asset value, then you've got to pay taxes when you transact those assets to your heirs. So let's say you're a farmer that's got 1,000 acres of land that you purchased for $20 an acre 4 generations ago. And now all of a sudden it's worth $20,000 an acre. Well, now you've got a property that adds up to, $20 million. And that's over the threshold where death taxes kick in. So the heirs would need to pay that death tax in order to maintain ownership of the property that's been in their family for generations. So that's a real problem. And so I think a lot of the farmers are taking the approach of saying, hey, look, I've got this opportunity to sell my land and cash out and capitalize on the assets that I've sat on for a long time. And if you're a farmer and you sell your land for $20,000, $30,000 an acre, that can turn into a very, very large sum of money. And still there's a death tax, but, there's the cash available to pay it. So I think there's a number of factors that are driving the production of these solar farms, but the biggest driving factor for them is the federal government tax credit that's existed at 30%. So if somebody spends $100 million to develop a solar farm, they've got a $30 million tax credit that they can use to offset income tax from other ventures. And so the company that owns the solar farm next to me and the 7 or 8 others here in Michigan and the 2 more under construction is actually one of the largest private equity firms in America. And I've got no doubt that they're building them in order to offset their income taxes from their private equity firm. And that's probably the only reason that they're investing.
Something that I'm kind of thinking here, since you guys were playing devil's advocate, I'm not playing devil's advocate. Although I want to look at the big picture. This isn't something I think our culture or our society has really put too much consideration into. Although your solar farm is creating electricity for what? Where is it getting sent to? How many kilometers far away is this electricity going to? Is it powering Detroit? Is this thing going hundreds of kilometers away for what it's powering?
No, it's all going into the local grid, Azura, just to clear that up really quickly. Just on the north side of the field, you saw where the transformer station was there just inside the gate. And it goes into the grid, and all that power then is owned by Consumers Energy, which has a monopoly on the power in this part of the world. It's essentially not enough from that field to even power the smallest part of Adrian Township, to be perfectly honest. So it's all being consumed in probably within the next 5 miles away from the field.
Because this also comes to the farming that you were talking about, your glyphosate spraying friends. They're producing farm crops to feed people how far away? This just kind of comes back to maybe when someone buys some property, because if you're going to have a death tax on your property moving over, maybe when you buy this property, you have to consider the electricity you can generate for yourself, the food you can generate for yourself. Like a lot of Adrian there, it's a sprawled out town. If each one of these people took on an amount of solar farm themselves, they could maybe power their own area. If they took on just a little bit of a garden at each one of those houses, they could subsidize a good portion of what they're eating in their life. Like a lot of what we're doing is created these complicated, elongated systems that just kind of exacerbate themselves in a long period of time because we're not just feeding ourselves in a perpetual small system. We've created this thing that's now a global scale that we've noticed in the past 5 years can shut down completely if it doesn't work.
Completely. Yeah, good points, Azure. And, you saw the solar cells that I've got on the roof of my workshop, right?
Yeah.
So those generate about 95% of my demand for electricity.
And that's not very much space of your property.
No, and it's sitting on a roof that I wouldn't otherwise be using, right? So, that's occupying, maybe 200 square feet of the roof at most. And so that's not a big area loss for me, and it's certainly not impacting agriculture because it's not sitting on top of the ground or anything. It's on a roof. So there's that. There's two types of solar. There's centralized solar, like the farm right next to me, and there's distributed solar, which is what I've got sitting on my barn. And I'm a really, really big fan of distributive solar. Like you said, if everybody took the responsibility to generate some of their own electricity, I think there'd be a lot more community resilience, especially if it was all grid connected, as mine is. Or they could have battery backup and then be completely self-sufficient, for their own power generation and storage and demand management. We've got a partner that specializes in that with the Grid Down folks, Lindsay, that are out in Kansas. So, we've got that kind of mentality of building or letting, other companies and other organizations do that for us, and then we get to pay the privilege of using what they generate. As I mentioned, Consumers Energy has somewhat of a monopoly in this area. Electricity is not cheap, and putting in a solar farm to generate more didn't make it any cheaper, and it should have. My logic is if somebody's invested that money to generate more electricity in my local area, that means the supply's gone up and the price should go down accordingly. It didn't. It went up. And that's, I think the unfortunate problem of having still in the United States localized monopolies on electricity and gas distribution, which I think is something that needs to be fixed separately. Going back to the comment about food and taking up farmland, you asked or made the comment about the farmers that spraying the glyphosate and what are they growing as food. I also want to throw back a little bit. The corn that's being produced in the United States, 97% of it is now genetically modified corn and is not used for human consumption. We have, I think, about 100 million acres of corn production every year, and I think there's about 1 million acres is actually for human food consumption in the form of sweet corn, and all the rest of it goes into animal feed and ethanol production for making gasoline additives. If we look at soybeans, we have about 100 million acres of soybean production in the United States. Again, 97% of it is genetically modified organisms. And the soybean is crushed to produce soybean oil, which then goes into the production of biodiesel. And then the crushed soybean meal goes into animal feed production for hogs and chickens and cows. So now I've accounted for 200 million acres of farmland that's not being used for human food production. And that's out of a total of 400 million acres of land that's used for agriculture in the United States. The only one of the big three that is still used for human food consumption is wheat. And so that's not genetically modified. It's not being sprayed with Roundup because it's not able to handle Roundup. And so that's one of the last big crops that's actually produced for human food consumption in America. And I think it occupies about 80 million acres of land here. The United States is actually not one of the largest producers of wheat. My original home country of Australia is up there on the top of that list, along with Canada and Argentina, I believe. So in any event, I don't believe at this point, to go to your point about farmland being taken up, we're actually just giving up food production for animals. And I can't tell you how much soybeans being exported, and how much corn is being exported and how much cornmeal is being exported because we're producing so much of it here in the United States, far more than we actually need. And if we looked at the original model of farming here in the Midwest, a farmer would have maybe 80 acres of land, and they would grow all the crops that they needed to support a couple, 3 cows, some hogs, etc. And they would produce all their own meat on their own property, all their own dairy on their own property, and they'd have chickens and produce their own eggs, and they'd grow apples, and they'd grow pears, and they'd grow plums, and they'd grow peaches, and they'd grow a large array of vegetables every year, and they'd can and preserve and store the heck out of all that stuff to get them through winter. That farming model disappeared probably, I guess, in the 1940s and 1950s, and started then to go towards this massive scale of production for 3 grains, most of which doesn't get used for human consumption. And so then the farmer became called a producer, not a farmer. They're producing revenue from a stream of, of crops that are used for other purposes than food. So I don't have a problem personally with soybean and corn acres disappearing in this country.
Well, I guess on that side of things, as far as infrastructure goes, what do you think is the biggest reason people are leaving rural areas and getting sucked into cities?
Oh,
At some point, it's going to have to start reversing a little bit because these
yeah,
cities are not sustainable and things are only getting worse there.
that's a real problem, and I concur that that's occurring faster and faster. You drive through the Midwest here, and you can go from town to town and see buildings boarded up because there's no purpose for them anymore. Homes boarded up, especially on what used to be small farms. And so, yeah, people are moving to the city. And I think the number one reason is for two things: work and education. In this particular town, we're blessed with what used to be 3 colleges. It's now 2. One of them can't maintain its enrollment. That's Siena Heights University, and has announced that in 2026 it will not take any new students in. And they're moving all the rest of the students to other colleges. And so we're losing 1,500 students in a college here. And so the next best option for those students is to try to go to one of the other 2 colleges in town, or to go to Detroit, where there's 3 or 4 colleges, etc., or to Ann Arbor, where there's the University of Michigan, an hour from here. So that's a real problem, for the kids that want to get a degree, and that's the mantra that has been pushed, is to get a degree. I don't necessarily concur with that mantra myself. None of my kids have a college degree, and they've all got great jobs. So I think there's going to be a reversion back to people getting trade skills. Some of the highest paying jobs right now are for electricians and plumbers and welders and car mechanics. I've got a car mechanic as a son, and he gets billed out at $165 an hour by the dealership that he works at. That's an example. So those are the 2 things that I think drive people to the cities, is work and education. And both of those are severely lacking in small towns in rural America, and I'm sure in Canada, and pretty much any other country. I think that's the reason that urbanization is occurring.
Yeah, I think it's always things like that. It's always incentive.
Yeah.
There's more incentives to be in a city, and them incentives are often manipulated through policies.
Yeah, I don't think people realize the cost of living in a big city. It's not cheaper in New York. It's not cheaper in Detroit. It's not cheaper in Cleveland. It's not cheaper in Houston. If I live in a small rural town, I'm paying half the rent or half the mortgage cost compared to being in a big city. So I think there's a lot of reason for people to reconsider moving back to the country. It's then creating the work opportunities, I think, is the thing that's going to be necessary. And, in my case, I make my own work now. As we all understand, that's how we've got to do it, and look at multiple streams of income to support, what used to be just one jobs, in somebody else's business at one point.
Have we lost Lindsay and Azure there? Are they still?
I think they're very still.
Very still.
I've got them spellbound, Cormac.
Yes. Great. That was excellent. It was definitely a thorough run through of Agrivoltaics. Oh, they're gone.
Yeah.
Hopefully they'll pop back in when they stick some money in the meter. Yeah. So, Graham, we were chatting on over in our school chat. If anybody wants to go over there, we have a Friday night chat where we just put the words to right.
Yeah, I'll be.
I
won't be at the one on Friday night this week because I've got my conference I'm attending. But as soon as I'm done with that, I'll be back on there now that this tree planting project's over. It's a great opportunity to meet, to chat, chew the fat, network with new people. So
and it's not recorded for anybody who's shy. So you have to go and join the Vine Permaculture School over there. It's basically a home for the podcast. That's where we were chatting about solar panels. I wanted to put hops on the solar panels and grow beer. That was my idea.
I want to put hops on the fences, frankly. So and grow some barley in amongst the panels. Then we've got beer.
Yeah. So what have you coming up? You said you're going to a conference tomorrow?
Yeah, I've been invited to speak at Purdue University Extension Services Rooted and Resilient Homestead Conference. It's the second year that they've done it. They had about 1,500 attendees last year. I've got a presentation I'm giving on Friday, which is tips for planting and looking after fruit trees. And it's about a probably 35, 40-minute presentation. And then on Saturday, I'm the keynote speaker and talking about transforming spaces and sustaining futures, which is a nice way of saying I'm going to give a 1.5 hour presentation over the lunch break on an introduction to permaculture and homesteading.
Great stuff. And where's that located?
It's going to be in Kendallville, Indiana. So that's about, it's close to Fort Wayne in northeast Indiana. It's just west of Fort Wayne, I believe.
Great stuff. And if anybody wants to catch Graham at that,
come and visit, please.
Go visit. And as for me, I have a couple of good guests coming up. I'm a bit behind on the podcast. Just the last month has been busy, so there hasn't been any since the last live. But I think 3 or 4 recorded. I was chatting to Marty's Garden. I don't know if you know him.
No.
I've been watching him now for 5 or 6 years. He's on YouTube. It was great to him on he's at school as well. I was over there. Has the Garden Creators Club, so it's like a mixture of garden and content creation as well, which is quite good. So I'm really enjoying school.
Awesome. Sorry
to punt that again. Yeah. Guys, Lindsay and Azure haven't come back for their goodbye.
Yeah, I'll say goodbye on behalf of Lindsay and Azure. Azure was fantastic to work with while he was here for 4 weeks. I had a lot of fun. The rest of the team had a lot of fun with him, getting to know him. We spent quite a bit of time taking him to different places here in Adrian. So fantastic person. I'm really happy for Lindsay and him that they're together. So Lindsay is the Chief Executive Officer of Permaculture Canada. Oh, and she could come back. I was just saying goodbye for the two of you. Now you can do it for yourselves.
Yeah.
Any final thoughts as well?
Yeah, sure. Final thoughts. I hope I have amazing internet connection going forward. I'm going to be traveling for the next 4 months, so it's going to be Mexico. I'm going to be teaching at Lake Atitlan in Guatemala in January. We're going to be going to Nicaragua for February and Panama for March. So each time I'm sure may come with some challenges as far as the internet goes, but hopefully along the way I can maybe capture some people to hop on the podcast with us. I'm hoping I'm meeting a lot of permaculture peeps everywhere we go. And just providing you updates with everything I'm learning. This month has been a big micro hydro. That's really the theme of our trip right now, is learning a lot about micro hydro. So that's really exciting. And thanks for having me on the show. And I'll let Azure give his wrap up as well.
I guess the wrap up for what I was talking about here and kind of where I'm going with my education with biotexture is I really just want to figure out how to de-urbanize, because I feel like the most toxic scenarios I've witnessed on this planet so far are from urbanization, and just kind of want to get that circled back around. What better way to do that than to use your actions to lead forward and get myself out of the city, get you out of the city, get a little more de-urbanized and refocused in a healthy way.
Perfect.
After
Lead by
this,
example, show us how it's done, right?
What's that?
Lead by example and show us all how it's done.
Yeah, maybe I'll find a little satellite hat that I can put on so we can tell you what's happening everywhere we go.
Beautiful.
Yeah, great stuff. Guys, thank you very much. And that's been the Permaculture Vine podcast. And I'll hopefully see you next week.
Okay.
Get back together and get some editing done. Cheers.
Thanks, mate.